Sinner Boys to Sinner Men, episode 6.
Fab.
Fantastic.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
How are you?
Hope you're well, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Who's this to my right?
Hello.
Hi. I thought you were going to actually introduce me, but you just looked at me.
Sorry, I forgot this isn't a visual medium.
No.
Visual way of, Sorry, Alfie Martin, back in the podcasting hot seat.
Thanks for keeping my throne warm.
Yes, indeed. He is back with us today to talk about The Fabelmans. Steven Spielberg's semi-autobiographical exploration of his, what would you say, sort of his love for the medium?
Yeah, and his childhood as well.
Yeah. We're going to talk about that, of course.
Lovely.
We're also going to talk about, as the film is semi-autobiographical, we're going to discuss the semi-autobiographical film. And you, Alfie, wanted to talk about sort of late era, sort of directors, established directors, sort of reflecting on their work with a sort of later effort.
Yeah, definitely. We'll get into that a little bit later on, I think.
Yes,
nice.
Good. Well, plenty of stuff to get into, so strap in.
Questing the cinematic void.
Okay then, so the semi-autobiographical film. Ben, shoot.
Right. Okay. So I wanted to talk about This Is England.
Okay.
So it's quite well known Shane Meadows movie from 2006. I think it's one of the best examples of a semi-autobiographical piece of filmmaking. Just because it comes from a place of sort of frank and brutal honesty. So almost an expression of nostalgia for a time, 1980s, but also regret, an expression of regret as well. So so Shane Meadows, the director, has been very open about the fact that this was based on his own experience of sort of being drawn into the sort of skinhead subculture in 1980s England.
Mm-hmm.
So very similar to the way the main character Sean was in the film. His newfound group of friends, given sort of a very isolated, troubled and kind of bullied Sean a sort of a new lease of life as he finally experiences a sense of sort of belonging and acceptance for perhaps, the first time since his dad died in the Falklands War. So it's a very sort of somber, reflective film. I feel like it's, Shane Meadows, far from deifying his younger self as some kind of angelic, innocent blank canvas. He actually sort of expresses an admission of like heartbreaking naivety, really, as he gets manipulated by the darker aspects of a subculture and sort of willingly partakes in acts of like Islamophobic violence, not because of the values that he holds, but because he's too young to kind of hold any values of his own, I guess.
Okay.
And I think a lot of semi-autobiographical films tend to romanticize the sort of young incarnation of the writer or director.
Yeah.
And this sort of does the complete opposite. It's really frank about the imperfect nature of like coming of age, and it's sort of Shane Meadows kind of admitting that his path to becoming an artist wasn't about absorbing like a creative medium. It was about straying into a kind, accepting, but also ultimately sort of fiercely nationalistic world. And got to thank that he didn't continue down that path. Really. But yeah, it's just a wonderful example of like fleshed out three-dimensional characters with really like abrasive flaws, and that notably includes its main character, who is a version of young Meadows for sure.
Yeah, I love that. That's really good. I really like that little intro, little spiel there. Very nice.
Just sort of diving into the idea of semi-autobiographical films. I think it'd be interesting to start with one that has nothing to do with film at all. I think it's cool in the sense that it's cool. No, it's great that he sort of explores that aspect of when you're younger, being imperfect and being susceptible to sort of belief systems and ideas purely because you just want to fit in. I think we can all attest to a time in our childhoods where we probably did things we weren't that pleased with. And that's all just because you want to fit in. And I think that's a really interesting angle to take. And I also think it's really interesting that you sort of mentioned that idea that so many of these filmmakers, when they get reflective, it doesn't tend to be negative, really, does it, about them? No, not
so
really.
The idea that Meadows would be honest about that, I think not only suits the film, but I think it gives that sort of I don't know. It gives the reflective nature of the film a bit more sort of potency, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's quite a timeless film as well, and it's sort of it's not black and white. It's not actually really trying to say that much at all. It's just an expression of a story.
Yeah.
And obviously, you could argue that it's slightly left leaning, but I don't think that's what it's concerned with chiefly at all.
No, agreed.
There you go.
Good film. I've not seen it in a very long time. My memory of it's a bit hazy because I know the TV shows was very well received as well, wasn't it? The subsequent TV show.
Yeah, they were a bit lighter.
Okay.
The film is very it's got Einaudis on the soundtrack, like a lot
On
of
the
sort of,
series.
No, on the film.
I can't remember. God, so long ago since I've
And
seen it.
there's a really nice cover of "Please, Please, Please, Let Me Get What I Want" as well. At the
I
end.
guess the films are kind of like showing him growing up, and he's not that kid that's kind of tearing between two different things. So the series allows him to kind of show a bit more humour and to be a bit more light. And I think it's naturally the nature of that long form content that there's more room for kind of humour and stuff as well.
Yeah.
Because they are harrowing the specials that he did, but they're good as well. I think Shane Meadows has done that a lot as well. He tends to reflect on his own life a lot in his filmmaking, but I don't think he does it better than in This Is England.
Yeah,
really.
no. That's definitely his best film, I think.
His sense of place is always really strong as well, isn't it? I was thinking like Dead Man's Shoes, which is actually not too far from my neck of the woods.
Oh, yeah.
So, God,
That's a harrowing film.
it's a harrowing movie, but that sense of place and almost how that sense of place has a relationship with the sort of more tragic elements of the film. Not obviously the main thrust of the film is especially difficult to get through, but just the sort of more comedically tragic gangsters that run that little drug organisation they've got. I don't know, that sense of place just helps him reinforce those themes and ideas, and the execution of tone so much more, I think, more effectively.
Oh.
Agreed. Okay, well, I was going to mention Paul Thomas Anderson.
Okay.
Yeah, a filmmaker that me and Alfie were joking beforehand, with the exception of There Will Be Blood.
There Will Be Blood, yeah.
I think we talked about it before about him.
Phantom Thread as well.
Yeah, Phantom Thread. Yeah, these period pieces that are a bit out of his age range. I don't think it'd be amiss to say that the vast majority of his films, with those notable exceptions, are incredibly personal to him.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, he kind of treads the same themes as well. There's the absent father figures as well, which I guess Spielberg is notorious for kind of addressing. And again, I think you mentioned like the San Fernando Valley setting or the LA setting predominantly. I think most of his films are set in Los Angeles.
Magnolia, Boogie Nights, and obviously Licorice Pizza.
Yeah,
definitely set there. So going back to what you're saying about Shane Meadows, the idea of semi-autobiography via a setting and a place, not necessarily a character, but just a continual expression of nostalgia via location. Yeah.
Why do you think he sets his films always there? Do you think it's because we mentioned this before in regards to Mark Jenkin, when we talked about Ennies Men, and we were discussing this idea of will he ever move his films away from Cornwall? Why do you think filmmakers are drawn to their sort of locations of their, not just their birth, but where they sort of where most of their formative moments seem to occur, their hometowns? What do we think about that?
With Anderson, I mean, so much of Boogie Nights is an interesting film because it is about filmmaking, but it's through the lens of being pornographic, like pornography. So he's talking about the process of making films in adult entertainment. So LA makes sense that you would set it in an area like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Magnolia is I guess a little bit more cryptic as to why, but I guess there's something that draws you to what you know. And he has occasionally ventured further afield. The Master's set in partly in London and all over America, I guess. And then obviously Phantom Thread is entirely set in England.
Yeah.
And There Will Be Blood is, I'm presuming, probably California because it's about like
the oil
boom and all that kind of thing. But he definitely draws back to these same locations ultimately, especially with Licorice Pizza, which is a really biographical film, I think, because it seems to reflect what he would have known, and it almost feels like a kind of an encapsulation of that singular idea, so it makes sense that he would go back to it later on over years of reflection. I think it's just you write what you know, though, ultimately, isn't it?
Yeah.
I also think it might be something to do with the fact that it looks nice on film.
Yeah,
It just like it's so flat and
Photographs well.
yeah. So for like that aspect ratio, you like the cinematic one. Like the whole, like everywhere you look is just like VistaVision almost. It's so like it's just landscape everywhere.
It's almost like the landscape has been sort of sculpted by the sort of industry.
Yeah, by filmmakers. Yeah, for sure.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's an interesting thought.
Mm.
I also like that sort of the sense of time as well in that sort of semi-autobiographical work. Obviously, with Paul Thomas Anderson, he was around in that era, very young, and I think we mentioned in a previous episode, but I really like, particularly in how in Licorice Pizza, that sense of time is almost like it's like a constant backdrop that never sort of invades the narrative particularly.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can talk about the sort of maybe aspects of like the gender roles of the characters being linked obviously to the time, but like the news in the background stuff going on and the oil prices. It's all in the background and it feels in a way, I don't know, like it gives it that sense of place more than it would be if the characters were addressing it directly.
And it feels more sincere than another, I guess you could argue, semi-autobiographical, but I think he's maybe a little bit too self-indulgent to really do it. But Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is obviously his reflection of his childhood, but it ultimately can't help but fall into the same problems of his later films.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna mask off for Tarantino because I do not like that film.
Do you not?
No, I don't. I think it's probably his worst film.
Oh wow, okay.
And ultimately it's because of the last 10 minutes of that movie.
Right,
okay. It falls apart because
the flamethrower thing.
Yeah. It's absurd. I know it's Tarantino, but it's almost like he was like, I'm going to make a grown-up movie, and then he just oh no, this is boring, people won't like it kind of thing. It's like I think he lacked confidence with that movie to a degree.
Interesting.
I think if it had done it from a perspective of a younger character that idolizes this era, because clearly he does, then maybe we would have had an interesting thing. Instead, he's got these characters that like basically just a walking Tarantino's. Like, everyone speaks the same, and
his dialogue is I think we've said this before. I mean, I quite like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but I remember a really long time ago, maybe when we were still at university, talking about Aaron Sorkin and about how even though his dialogue is good, it's so difficult not to imagine him saying it.
Yeah.
Saying it through the character,
Yeah.
and it gets to that point where all of his characters just sound like extensions of him.
I think Tarantino does.
I never quite thought of it in the same way as Sorkin, but I can completely see that actually. Even though I quite like
it works though. So when his films are heightened, it makes sense. But he said he wanted that to be a hangout movie, which to me brings to mind like Dazed and Confused or something like that.
Yeah.
And it almost is, but he just can't help but like indulge his worst impulses. Like let's kill Charles Manson's like gang members or whatever, like things like that.
Let's twist history because I'm Tarantino and I must do that.
Exactly. Whereas Licorice Pizza is a really sincere and honest reflection of a time that isn't necessarily a good time.
No.
It might be fondly remembered, but there's things that evidently remind us why it was difficult, which I think Fabelmans also does very well.
Agreed. Yeah, I like the idea of sort of how we've talked about it before in our sort of nostalgia episode, about how nostalgia can obscure imperfection, and I think that it's interesting that you mentioned Tarantino in that context, because there is an argument there for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that he's definitely so nostalgic for this time, which obviously for film buffs like us is a really important time, right? I mean, the birth of New Hollywood, and some of the great films that you just fall in love with, and
definitely.
But there's a lot of difficulty and there's a lot of issues in that time that perhaps are not really acknowledged at all. And then I guess you could argue, well, that's not really what the film's about, but I think to throw so much reverence on something, you can understand why people would be critical of not addressing some of the more difficult and more troubling aspects of that period of history.
Do you think that a semi-autobiographical film is likely to be more successful if there's a degree of like criticism to that period, much like This Is England? As you say, he doesn't sugarcoat even his own character, which is a cipher for him,
and his own vices and his own sort of failures. Although he was a boy, like he doesn't shy away from that. I think, I don't know, successful in terms of like more people seeing it, but I think I think they hold more water over time.
Agreed. Yeah.
Because I was thinking of an example is 400 Blows, obviously. Francois Truffaut did several films with the same actor, didn't he? Is it Antoine Donnell?
Yeah, Antoine Donnell, yeah, I think.
Probably bastardising the pronunciation.
We don't do research.
Yeah. Is it King Cattrall? No, it's Gene Smart. But he worked with that actor again and again, and he and obviously 400 Blows. I mean, that movie came out in 1959 or something, and it's the benchmark for the semi-autobiographical film in that, like, you know, even ends with him on a beach, like, Shane Meadows, I'm sure, is very aware of that as well. But of course, no, I mean, I feel like that movie is remembered fondly because it doesn't shy away from showing things warts and all, kind of in a critical.
Yeah, and I think being critical will open up to like this other area of discussion about modern time, I guess, you know, reflecting on the socio-economic issues of then and now. So if you do it properly, it can be the gateway to that. We sort of criticised Babylon for the way it sort of threw those elements in. Yeah. There was a few scenes in that film which tried to sort of approach the darker aspects of the sort of 20s, 30s.
But it can't help but kind of be reverential to that.
Yeah, so it just sort of like, they just sort of threw them in. So I don't know what you take from it. That we're never satisfied in that department. I don't know.
I thought that was slightly prescriptive, that throwing in of those issues, because the vast majority of it just was totally unconcerned with them. Yeah, I think maybe that was the problem. Is it was a kind of an obligation. It was because it didn't
fought out. Maybe.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's just it has to be there at inception and through and designed into the film as opposed to just kind of dropped in at the last minute.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I haven't seen Babylon, so I can't comment. I will say shit though.
My opinion is still very much the same here. Sometimes I think about this quite a lot. Like we'll discuss a film and really fucking like hammer it, and then a few weeks later I'll think actually, but that hasn't happened in Babylon. If anything, my opinion sort of stayed the same.
Yeah, me too actually.
Richard Linklater.
Yeah, I mean, like Slacker's very. I mean, that's just looks like a snapshot of his life, right?
Yeah.
He interestingly revisit. I mean, obviously the before films is probably the best.
Yeah, definitely.
He's revisiting the same characters, the same at different perspectives in his life. That ends up being a broader picture of kind of what would you call it? Self-reflection, I guess, and very autobiographical.
Yeah, there's that story of for the before Sunrise. He met a woman in a toy shop in Philadelphia and spent the whole night walking around with her, and that was why he wrote
never
that
happened
film.
to me.
I know, it's bizarre.
Not that I need it to now. Sorry, Georgia. I just mean that, you know, that kind of stuff never happens to, you know. Yeah. It feels filmic, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
And that's because of people like Linklater. But I'm not denying it didn't happen. Well, he seems like a lovely.
We don't know for sure. That's what I read.
You're a bullshitter, Richard.
I'm calling you out.
You didn't go to walk with anyone.
It is Linklater. That's an interesting point. I, as far as I know as well, the third film was so difficult for them to make that it kind of killed any chance of them ever doing another one because they had so many severe falling outs. I think it was particularly Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy. I might have made this up, but I'm pretty sure I've read that.
Exclusive.
Yeah.
So the boys
my friend Ethan Hawke told me. No, I remember reading something like that, and it was a really rough production.
Oh wow, I wasn't aware because I mean
they wrote it together, didn't they?
Yeah, because he has that process with all three films, doesn't he? They almost co-write. But I was never aware of there being genuine issues.
I think it was just the tensions in there because obviously they're writing about their own lives, and that movie did sort of suggest marriages that are kind of on the rocks to a degree. Particularly that third one. It's not very romantic.
No.
Compared to Before Sunset, which is like, you know, one of the most romantic films ever made.
Yeah.
You know, you're not getting that in that plane.
Exactly. Oh man, it's a beautiful film.
So good.
I might have to re-record that because I think I said nat plane.
No, leave it in. And then cut from here and have me go, Ben, you messed that line up.
One thing I particularly really like about Linklater is how he sort of treats time in his films. And this might be a bit of a stretch here, and this might sound like we're just throwing it in to sort of get film student points. But I was watching an Ozu film yesterday.
Where are you now?
Yeah, Dirty Boy. And it sort of reminded... It sort of reminded me of how, the similarities to how they sort of treat time. It's almost like you're dipping into their own memories.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like, so it's like these interactions that have sort of seemingly little consequence end up becoming these formative moments in your life purely through the act of reflection later on. And I think that's something I really love about Linklater, and of course Ozu is one of my absolute favourites. But Linklater, he does that so well, particularly in the sort of experience of youth and how everything's so fast and fragmented, and there's so little concern about the future. It's all about the then and now, and it just ties in beautifully with that approach to sort of time.
That's lovely. I've never really considered Linklater's perspective as specific as that, but I think you're right. I think he even plays with time as a format, not to like as explicit a degree as someone like Chris Nolan, but like Before Sunset is real time. Before Sunrise and Midnight, I don't think are. I might be getting the order of them wrong, but one of them is set in real time.
The middle one is the one in Paris,
because that's the short one, isn't it? It's like
it's like one long memory. Almost.
And then obviously Boyhood has done that. He's done a similar thing there, and he definitely has a sort of I mean, what was that one? Everybody Wants Some. That's kind of that acts as a nice kind of.
I've not seen that.
Oh mate,
it's good.
It's actually really good.
Yeah, I was surprised by how good that was.
It acts as a sort of companion piece to Dazed and Confused, my personal favourite of his, which has both have that kind of hazy memory of like your those either those last days or those first days. But he does do films about days and times and eras, and that's I love that. I'd never considered that. You learn something when you listen to Cineboys.
Yes. Keep listening, please. Agreed. I think this would be a good place to move on to the next sort of area of our discussion, which is filmmakers, particularly older filmmakers, been around for a while. I was about to say been on the game,
been on the take for
and they get into this sort of their twilight years, and they start looking backwards via a film. So they make a movie that looks backwards. Go on, Alf. You were the one that sort of, because this is something I hadn't really considered, which is strange given that Fabelmans is exactly that. But so I just want you to shoot with that baby.
A lot of the filmmakers from that new Hollywood era are obviously now they're in their 70s, 80s, if not passed away. A lot of them have, but you can see a lot of those filmmakers that are still with us, like Scorsese. I mean, his movies now are really long and meditative. Like if you're talking about something like Silence, which obviously is a deep exploration of like what it means to be religious and spirituality. Which obviously is something he's visited throughout his career, all the way back to Mean Streets, which is a whole movie about questioning your faith.
He nearly became a priest, didn't he, himself?
He nearly did, and that's what Mean Streets, I think, is largely about. And then so for him to years later make Silence, which is a 3.5 hour movie about questioning your faith, he hasn't let go of that idea. No. But instead he's come back and he's arguably made his best look at it, and then again with The Irishman, which I think maybe is less successful, but he's defined by his gangster films, right? He's defined by obviously Goodfellas and Casino, because it's more in that mold, but obviously Mean Streets is a gangster film. Taxi Driver is a crime film, I guess you can kind of qualify it. Yeah. So The Irishman, that movie is very sad and very bitter.
It is, yeah.
Oh god, yeah.
In terms of looking at what a man like that lives that life, what do they really achieve? And I think Spielberg is definitely doing the same sort of thing. Films that he's made recently, you can argue are all kind of reflections on his own kind of career.
Like Ready Player One, I was going to say, just like he had to reference his own films in that, which is like a pop culture extravaganza.
Definitely. And he is arguably he is the pop cultural filmmaker, right? Like he's the sort of signifier of that kind of American pop cinema.
He produced a lot of the films he didn't direct, like Back to the Future. He was involved in it. Kind of thing. So
he kind of, him and Lucas kind of spearheaded the return of the blockbuster in the 70s. And then he's still making them now with films like Ready Player One, which I think was a pretty big hit.
It was,
critically
yeah.
and commercially.
I mean, I really didn't like it.
No, I actually haven't seen it, which would have probably helped if I'd have watched it. But,
Yeah, it's not great.
Yeah,
But it has.
really
it's the
didn't-
source material that's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we sort of spoke about this again. It's not to reference another episode again. So we're sort of plugging ourselves until we get a sponsor. That's all we can do.
And it's a word for our sponsor, Cineboys to Cinema. Episode 5 out now.
But it's just that sort of constant. I don't know. I feel like that level of nostalgia is it's just poisonous.
Yeah,
I think it's so poisonous in the movie.
There's a good Shining bit in it. I like the bit about The Shining.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought that was alright, but it just made me want to watch The Shining.
Yeah,
That was all it did.
The Iron Giant turns up as well. For
Yeah,
a bit, and I was
that's
like, oh,
right.
don't do that to him. I love that.
Kind of the
movie.
start of that whole metaverse influence on film as well, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
is it multiverse even? I don't know which.
Oh yeah, just the kind of amalgamation of all the things you know and love that have come out in the last 20, 30 years, just like all thrown into one film.
I mean, it's another episode. We could do this another day, but
agreed.
it frustrates me to no end, this kind of obsession with self-reflexivity in Hollywood at the moment.
Agreed.
You know?
Yeah.
But anyway,
also, just quickly, who's the guy that wrote the book? I forget his name. Ernest Cline.
Oh,
Check out his poem.
oh, link it up.
Yeah. Nerd porn auteur.
Oh man.
Honestly,
It's
go online,
extreme cringe, man.
read that, and tell me this guy isn't a fucking gomp.
So
Seriously.
it's just serious neckbeard.
Oh,
vibes,
mate,
isn't
it's
it?
so bad.
Well, I
I
suppose
mean,
you'd say incel now, wouldn't you?
yeah, I mean, not to we try and refrain from being too critical of stuff here.
I don't have to because I'm like a guest. So.
Yeah, you come in and go right off with the sunset.
a fucking loser. You swear on here.
Oh yeah.
I wanted to just get back to my train of thought, but I've lost it.
Thanks to Ernest.
Yeah, thanks, Ernest. It was this older filmmaker. I have a theory. I think that like certainly with painters, that as they get older, they almost hit like a kind of a period of just unrefined excellence, and I think you could make this the case for a lot of filmmakers, especially kind of auteur filmmakers, if you believe in the theory.
Yeah.
I mean, Kurosawa was making really fascinating films towards the end of his life.
Just take it straight from the brain, man.
Right.
Yeah, no, good. Carry on.
Well, I was going to talk about Dreams, because Dreams is a movie, about memories.
No.
No, sorry. Yes. All right, guys, let's high five. It's like a movie about memories and reflection, and it's something that Kurosawa had been writing down his dreams for like his entire life, and I think a lot of his films have that feel anyway. But for him to make a movie at the end of his career just called Dreams, it's like David Lynch making Twin Peaks season 3, and it's just a commentary on everything David Lynch has ever made. There's something about when you're late into your career that you're kind of drawn towards reflection, I think. And I think that was all I really wanted. So it's just make that point about kind of great old artists kind of revisiting their...
Yeah, no, I think it's a really fascinating area of discussion, and I particularly like it in the context of The Irishman, because it is a really sad movie.
Yeah.
And about the nature, just about facing your mortality, I guess, and looking back on, like you say, how little you've managed to, how small a dent you've made.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And living with what you've done as well, because again, Scorsese is very Catholic, and he judges everyone in his films so harshly that, like, through the eyes of God, you will be judged in death.
It ends on such a whimper, doesn't it? I mean it in a good way in the context of The Irishman, but it really does slow down gradually, and you're forced to age with Robert De Niro's character. I've forgotten his name.
Frank Sheeran.
Frank Sheeran.
There he is.
Yeah,
what do you think of the idea? Because Frank Sheeran's book, I Heard You Paint Houses.
Okay,
the source material for the film. Basically, he insinuates that he was the guy that killed Jimmy Hoffa. They don't know who killed Jimmy Hoffa. This is a complete tangent. But what do you think of the fact that this guy basically says, "Yeah, it was me. I was there. I also did this. Bobby Kennedy, I killed him," and he's like the Forrest Gump of gangsters. That's just something someone said to me. I always thought it was really funny.
It's strange, isn't it? If it is true, it's the fucking most bizarre way to confess, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is, isn't it? It's so strange.
In a rambling kind of potboiler tell-all novel. Scorsese's like, right,
let's bring this to life.
Let's de-age Robert De Niro.
I think it's really interesting, and I think it ties in really well with, because obviously, Scorsese, so much of his filmography explores the sort of intricacies of criminality, organised criminality. And I think so much of, at least to my mind, so much about the crime film or the gangster film is about frustration. It's always about people that are frustrated and want to do more, want to be more, because that's what criminality is. And all this organised stuff about family and blood, and it's all just artifice. Really, it's just a group of men who, and sometimes women, but in the case of Goodfellas, it's mostly, it's sort of very patriarchal. It's all about frustration and people climbing on top of each other, and no one's ever safe. No. And I feel like it really hammered that point home really well in The Irishman.
In The Irishman.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
I need to revisit that film actually.
It's a difficult watch.
Yeah,
it's
not least
long.
of all because the decision to de-age 80-year-old men was bad.
Yeah,
it doesn't look great.
It's fast. It is real fast. Some of that, like
there's a bit where he goes round, like his daughter comes home and she's like, "Oh, the shopkeeper insulted me." And he goes round to the shop and it's like he's shuffling like an old man, and he goes in and
he's just
like,
hunched over, isn't he? Yeah.
And he like pushes the guy out, and the guy acts so like he's like flies backwards.
Like he's made a Frey bent off.
It's outrageous, man. It's like that movie is great and like arguably has some of like the most interesting themes of Scorsese's work that like really deeply dived into, but like that one scene almost ruins it for me. Because it's so uncomfortable to watch.
The de-aging technology can only do so much, right? It can't fix posture or anything like that.
They should have just put his face on. Who is it they used? The Army Hammer's body double, that guy, like in
Josh Pence.
Josh Pence.
Shout out to Josh Pence.
I just knew Ben would know that. Because he was also in Dark Knight Rises, right? As like a faceless. I think he was the young Liam Neeson in that or something.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, they
never
got
see
the
him.
Same guy in from the Social Network. This guy's really talented at not being himself.
Josh Pence.
Joshua
Pence.
Yeah.
Shout out Josh Pence.
My man.
We'll try and get him on.
He would just have to be silent the whole time. Good to say he's on here now.
So I guess that means we can go quite nicely into the Fabelmans.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest, I don't know why. I don't know if it's because I'm sort of feeling a bit like negative about films recently, because the last few we've watched I haven't really enjoyed a great deal. And I went into the Fabelmans expecting to come out feeling the same, that I didn't enjoy it. And I came out and I was so pleasantly surprised. And I know that sounds really condescending given the fact it's fucking Spielberg. And you should never write off Spielberg, which is something I always, have to reflect on when I come out of his films. Because every time I'm like... Well, not every time. He's not can't please everyone. But I don't know. Like I was just really, really pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed the film overall. Problems, of course. Yeah. Wouldn't be a Cineboys episode without us going. But overall, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I wasn't as keen on it as you were. I did really like it overall. I came out and even though it was fairly long, I thought like I was satisfied. I think the strongest points of the film, I'll get into this more a bit later, but I think the film's strengths lie in how it deals with family and family dynamics, and I was a bit more troubled by the way it dealt with him and his career and his filmmaking. That wasn't a negative aspect of the film, it was just the weaker of the two, I thought.
Alfie?
Yeah.
I mean, I do really love Spielberg, but he's a filmmaker that I've kind of turned more to as I've gotten older. I agree with a lot of his films, but I think there's an element of like sacredness about him that made me maybe be a bit more critical of him. Like, but now
I can get by that. Yeah.
Now I kind of watch his movies and I'm like, oh, okay, I really get the appeal of this, and I think his later stuff he does, like films like The Post and. They're all quite subdued and kind of grounded for him. Like Bridge of Spies was
that's
excellent as well.
I've not seen it. I've not seen Bridge of Spies.
It's really good.
Yeah,
I've been to the actual bridge.
Have you?
Yeah,
that's cool.
Lie down on the road with a beer. Not quite the same experience.
I don't remember that bit in the film. Mark Rylance.
Just dragging himself along.
And I mean, I am a sucker for these kind of like movies about movies generally, which is why I was so disappointed after listening to your episode that Babylon isn't good, or at least by your consent. Because I'm a big fan of the filmmaker's previous work, but that's besides the point. What I knew is that I probably would like this film going in. It is very kind of self-congratulatory. You could criticize it for that.
Yeah.
But it is also kind of like honest about what he deems to be his failures as a person, and also what makes him a great artist, and how maybe those things kind of ultimately balance each other out, or even influence each other to a degree. And that was something that I loved about that film. You know, to hear him sort of say, yeah, like, you're probably going to piss people off by putting art first, kind of thing. Like, it's an interesting idea.
Agreed. I sort of came out of it thinking it was about sort of different things about from the art perspective, as art as escapism, art as control, and also how the sort of domestication of the technology that filmmakers use, the camera, almost sort of erodes the sort of, I don't know, the sort of fantastical impact of the filmmaking experience.
Definitely. Yeah. For a man that makes such kind of fantastical movies and like ambitious and kind of like fun movies, it is very like warts and all about how the process is, right? It's kind of boring, and it's kind of like you know, everyone's being dragged into this little kind of control freaks world, basically. You know, if you want, like, and
it's almost like, I mean, I think when I started to think about this idea of the domestication of technology, obviously, a young, I forgot the character's name, let's call him fucking Spielberg.
Sammy Fabelman.
Sammy Fabelman, but it's Sammy Spielberg, basically. He gets given a camera, and I guess that's like the beginning of it. Like, the technology started out being as something that was used for only a certain sort of strata of people, and then all of a sudden it can come into the home, into the domestic space, and it's the inclusion of that, or the bringing of the camera to the domestic space, that creates friction between him and his mum, because he identifies, spoilers, his mum's potential infidelities. Seth Rogen's character. So I found that really interesting, because on the one hand, the film is about, you know, the beauty of the silver screen, what's in the frame, the sort of the pursuit of art, I guess, in a world that isn't really sort of accepting of that, the pursuit of becoming an artist. And then almost having this fantastical element. I know you sort of had issues with how it frames him as a filmmaker, but I quite liked it because it felt fantastical, and it felt like, I don't know, sort of really sweet and dreamlike, which really worked for me. But then he offsets it with that moment of realisation that the camera can actually, it's not just about escapism, it can find things about people you really don't want to know. It's
a very Spielbergian metaphor. He loves that kind of thing, to sort of like, you know, to use something as a real kind of symbol, you know, and in this case it's like a 16mm editing deck is like or an 8mm editing deck is the symbol of like, oh, the camera reveals truth, you know, like in the most literal way possible, but it does, you know, like this is a guy whose movies predominantly had parents with issues, you know, like whether it's Poltergeist, which he did direct, as far as I'm concerned.
Sorry, Tobe.
Sorry, Tobe Hooper. Rest in peace. But or E.T. or any of these movies where the parents are kind of shown as difficult. Indiana Jones, I mean, he's got daddy issues on most of his films, you know. It almost seems like now that he's an older filmmaker, he can reflect on it and be like, oh yeah, I've probably pissed people off here, like, you know, that's, I love that metaphor, like that how he does that. But what is it that you find it to be a problem then? Because I'm quite interested to hear some criticisms of it.
I don't know whether it was just the frame of mind I was in when I went to see it, but I thought it was, he just presented himself as a genius, right? Which he has every right to do, because he is. But he sort of refused to acknowledge that there was privilege there. I thought he didn't kind of, he sort of, the message was that it was nature, not nurture, and I just don't think that was the case at all. I think he was extraordinarily privileged to get where he is now, and there wasn't that much of it in the film. I just sort of thought, I was expecting that maybe, and I didn't get it, and it was
a bit more struggle maybe, or privilege in the sense of financial privilege.
The fact that he, you know, he had although there was some problems with the family dynamics, I think that, you know, he had
safe middle class kind of life.
Yeah, and he had access to all this equipment. At one point, his uncle like tries to give him a camera, and like obviously because of the family stuff, he's like refusing to take it. And I don't know. I just thought like it was odd to me that he just like there was a bit where all of his scout friends are just like applauding him, and then like there's no acknowledgement that he learnt this stuff. It's like it was in him already.
Okay.
And it
I've
just
not considered that.
Yeah, I just thought it rubbed me the wrong way a little bit. And there was a bit where the school bully, like after sort of tormenting him for ages, although he has some problems with the way he was depicted in the film, he just like offers him a spliff, and it was a bit like a fantasy of.
I think it is though. I think he's kind of going back and like he's papering over the cracks.
Yeah,
like he gets to walk back and hug his mum again. You know, like he doesn't get a chance to do that. You know, like ultimately.
That's true.
You know,
I mean, maybe it is more fantastical than I kind of, but maybe I'm thinking too much that it's more of a biography. And
it is called Fabelmans.
Yeah,
Meta.
It just to me it was like that bit, especially.
That's a fair criticism, though.
No, I agree, and I think it's especially because I quite liked the scene with the bully, but upon reflection,
Wes Bentley. He looked like Wes Bentley. Anyway,
that's not Wes Bentley. He's like 40s.
Yeah, but he does look like
de-aged Wes Bentley for the role.
Yeah, what the hell?
Sorry.
My mind.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's right. He just sort of very articulately sort of is able to express his discontent with Sammy about how he sort of elevated him as this hero in the film, which kind of works in the context of this fantasy thing, but really, I mean, it is a bit strange that he's like, you're making me look like a hero, and all I've done is bully you. It's like, do people really think like that? Like, I don't know. Maybe they do. I don't know.
Do you think there's a degree of it that, like, because this guy's like this kind of blonde American, like, kind of
almost Aryan?
Yeah, he's like borderline Aryan, but like he's a super handsome kind of leading man looking guy. Like, if the movie had that guy in the lead role, it'd be a Marvel film or something.
Yeah, that's true.
But like you think of like the kind of people that he's put through in his films, in like Harrison Ford, another kind of charismatic, handsome kind of guy. Like the whole look of that film is the way he's filming him. He makes him the hero in this little film. Which again, you made me a hero. It's like it's very on the nose. It's not a subtle movie, is it? But
no.
Is it just sort of like a comment that like the director's job is to make handsome men more handsome, and just sitting in the back going?
I guess maybe that, and also maybe Spielberg kind of like see, like, he has to sort of filter everything through the lens of another person, doesn't he? Because this is like the first time he's being honest about himself as a filmmaker, I suppose. And he's not even being honest, is it?
No, because there's that bit at the end of the discussion where, like, not everything. I think the guy says, I'm sort of paraphrasing. The bully guy says, like, you know, not everything's like a film, and then he says to him, but you've got the leading lady."
Yeah.
So it's almost like tying it back into that idea, which is strange. I'm not. Yeah. Now you said that, it does make me feel a bit more uncertain about that scene, and just more broadly, I guess.
It's a little bit contrived, isn't it? That like everything could resolve on one night, like, so quickly. I mean, they do make a point of showing that bully's not as bad as the little weird.
Oh, you're the anti-Semitic one.
Yeah, he's like that actor, just like
hateful.
Yeah, he just looks like he's just going to always play that character.
I was so happy when he got socked in the face.
Oh, yeah, I know. He like staggers down the hallway.
Yeah.
Imagine he might be like 48 and still playing those kind of characters.
Yeah, I know.
That does happen to some people, doesn't it?
Yeah. Typecast to the nth degree. I just thought that scene was a little bit like he'd thought of a response to an argument 10 minutes too late.
You know what I mean? When you're in the shower, like, I should have said that. This movie is Spielberg's like shower thoughts. There's a great scene in it with Judd Hirsch, who I think rightfully gets an Oscar nomination just for one scene, basically. And that's the old. Is it, what would he be, an uncle? I don't know.
I think he is an uncle, isn't he? Yeah, that's sort of a distant uncle that suddenly appears. Sort of like a Coen-esque appearance.
Yeah.
What the hell's he doing?
Quite surreal.
It reminds me of the appearance of John Goodman in Inside Llewellyn Davis.
Oh yeah,
he just sort of appears. But it doesn't derail the film at all.
No, it doesn't. And it ends up being a really dense, well, not dense, but like apt metaphor for like the film in itself being about, you know, what like, again, we were talking about the this camera reveals truths. Like, he says something to him about, like, if you choose to be an artist, then you're basically you can't have it both. He effectively says, like, family or art. He says, like, that's what his uncle says to him, and you're just like, oh man, it's a harrowing message, isn't it, to be given at that age.
I did like that scene. Actually.
I did. It was on the nose, 100%, but it was done in such a way that didn't bother me.
No, I thought it was well done. It's one of those examples of an actor getting a nomination for like one scene. Michelle Williams does get nominated, and I think she earns it. But I think Paul Dano deserves it as well. He does a great job in this film.
He's very good at playing sort of slightly pathetic men.
I can't help but always feel sorry for him. Like,
Yeah,
I always just
yeah.
like, you're trying to be like, mate, it's all right.
Yeah,
and in this
no.
movie, he's so sad.
Oh, he is. Yeah,
He's just looking at everything sadly. Like,
He's strange, isn't he, in the sense that he's obviously a very kind, supportive, and thoroughly decent individual.
he's just kind of absent.
But he's absent,
Yeah.
and in the sense that he can't, he's sort of like he can't be angry. Like
Yeah.
he's obviously quite unsure about Sammy's obsession with being a filmmaker throughout the entire film, but it's sort of bubbles away quietly. I mean, obviously, I don't know if that is reflective of how Spielberg's dad was in real life. If that's the case, then fine. But I don't know. He's just someone that he obviously has a lot of things that he keeps on the down low, and that ends up being one of the reasons why he gets divorced, isn't it? Because he's not. I don't know. It's a strange thing to get divorced for, but you can sort of see where Michelle Williams is coming from a little bit. Her character.
Yeah.
I think he's fighting so much for like a kind of to have this perfect life.
Yeah.
That he's neglecting everything.
Yes.
Else, he's neglecting his own wife who has her own interests and things like that, and it's just quite. It's a very sad movie ultimately, but it has that lovely Spielberg kind of like sugar coating. It's like you can kind of forget some of the more horrible aspects of it, but when you kind of sit there, the under the surface, it's kind of everything's rotting, isn't it? Like
I think that his dad is effectively jealous of the creative brain, and he himself is, you could argue he was a creative himself, but it's such a mechanized thing that he's doing, and he can't express anything properly as a result of that, because his job is clearly just basically it's ones and zeros, isn't it? It's computing and
hugely important job.
Oh, massively, yeah.
It's not nowhere near as romantic.
Yeah.
Do you think Sammy ends up being a product of both of those worlds then, because his mum is very talented, musical, and kind of creative and free, but like he sits there on his editing deck and like
he's
like
got,
figuring out his technical popping the the to get the guns.
He's got his dad's mechanical edge as well.
Yeah, exactly.
It melds together quite well. I thought
he's sort of the mediator between one of the sort of central conflicts between the parents in that regard, isn't he? Because it is about this battle between creativity and being a realist.
Yeah,
like I think it's something we've had to deal with as we went off to film school. You know, and I remember telling my dad I wanted to do it, and he never would have told me not to do it. But I could tell he was like, why? Because it is something that it's risky. It's a risky pursuit, and we were talking about Kevin Smith before we started the podcast, but he's like the guy that everyone looks to, right? Is the person that's like bet it all. Yeah, he put all of his chips on red. He put all his chips on number 3 on the roulette board. Somehow it all just he cashed it. It all cashed in for him, but. There are so many people that doesn't work out for. Not to be too dour, but that's just the fact of the business, the fact of reality.
You missed a chance to say number 37.
Yeah.
I think that it's very easy for a lot of people, young and old, in the world to refuse to acknowledge a cultural economy. Because it's so easy to fail and so hard to succeed in it.
Yeah.
His dad's just an example of one of those people, and that's not a good or bad thing. It just is.
It just seems inaccessible, doesn't it? The same way when you would talk about the process of filmmaking, like so many people probably don't have the first clue about what it's actually like. And I don't mean that as like, hey, you don't know, because why would you know? If you're not interested, why would you know? But like, there is a sort of veneer of, I don't know, there's something that's almost impenetrable about it.
Well, I mean, I think it is impenetrable, and that's kind of what film school taught me. This is hard. But I personally don't come from much privilege in the world, really, and so going to film school and realizing some people already had connections when I got there was very kind of like, oh, okay, sure, I don't know anyone, we'll get by on our talent. It does. I wonder how he could have critically engaged that point.
Yeah,
what I mean. That I suppose he could have had like his little poor mate in it that like wears rags and stuff. And it's like
I agree with you that it probably wouldn't have worked to acknowledge a privilege and a lack of it. I don't know. I just at the moment in the moment in cinema,
criticism though.
Yeah. I also thought that the whole idea that all filmmakers have like a eureka moment in their past, which sort of siphons them down the path to becoming a genius. And in this case, it was him watching a train crash from The Greatest Show on Earth. I just thought that kind of story gets slightly embellished and kind of gets repeated throughout their careers in like press tours and stuff, to the point where maybe they believed it happened. I don't know. that whole thing of like, the first time I watched this film.
Do you have like one formative moment? Because I would. Not that I'm ever going to be popular enough to be asked that question, but like
I'll ask you it.
That was basically what this whole podcast is for. After this, it's over. This question, I'm jacking it in. But no, can you guys think of one moment that sort of kickstarted your love for the medium? Is it the same? Is your thought process on it the same as it was when you sort of realised this was it?
I think the first time I realised I watched a movie from the perspective of, actually, like, I feel like that's something I'd want to do, was, weirdly enough, I watched School of Rock, Richard Linklater.
Yeah.
It's the first time I was aware that it was a movie.
Yeah.
Like, in the way, like, I was 9 or something, but I was like, oh my God, this is like a job, basically. And I never thought of it before. Like, maybe I was just kind of a dumb kid, but, like, it just clicked in my head that I was like, oh yeah, like, this is just all these kids in it are just acting, and it's like a job, and it just dawned on me in a weird way, and I basically was like, I'm going to make films.
Okay.
From that point on.
I don't have one, and that might be why I found it strange.
Okay.
I cannot think of one. It was a series of films, I think. I think it was maybe more of a gradual
sort of
realization. Yeah, and
I think that's it with myself.
Yeah,
like I was obsessed with films, and then at a point I was like, oh, okay, like
I can't pinpoint the moment at all. I wanted to make something on holiday, and I filmed it, and like I didn't even edit it, and maybe that might have been a moment, but it was more gradual for me. And again, that might be why I didn't connect too much.
It's a different era as well, though. Like we grew up with the benefit of internet and home video and things like that. And Spielberg and those kids of that era, they grew up in that kind of golden age of cinema.
Yeah.
It's the greatest story ever told is the film, right? Isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that is one of those prestige kind of like epics, isn't it? So like I imagine all of those kids that did go and watch that movie probably did all have those like 100,000 of them did probably have that moment of thinking, filmmaker, you know, like.
Yeah, because I can't. The only thing I can think of that really stuck out at me is when I was playing fetch with my dog in the garden, and I stood in cat sick and recalled in horror and banged my head on the corner of a windowsill and started bleeding profusely from my skull.
Oh wow!
And I remember my mum plonked me on the sofa, and I'm obviously like, when you're a kid, you're terrified of blood anyway. But when you bleed from your head, you're like, fucking hell, this is bad.
That's bad now.
And I remember watching the original Lost World, the 1920s sort of Lost World.
Okay.
And I was always really fascinated by those kinds of films, like not necessarily stop motion, that one, but that kind of technology.
Yeah.
And that's when I first started thinking, this is incredible that, you know, that this is there and I can watch it and there's someone that's made that. So that's the only time I can think. Well, I wasn't really thinking, I was sort of panicking and bleeding, but I remember, you know, at the same time, it kind of stopped me from being so worried. Yeah. And thinking about it in that way. I don't know.
I do wonder if it's literal as well, because like he's been careful by calling him Sammy. You know, his dad did work for IBM, and you know, they did eventually move to like Arizona and places like that. That is true of Spielberg's life, but the benefit of it not being his life means that it might not have been the greatest story ever told. It might have just been the most convenient one for the sake of the movie.
Maybe.
Because then ultimately he just uses it as a way to remake the scene. Which I thought was really clever, because I don't think there was ever a point where I was like, I'm going to remake something.
No. I'm going to remake Jason and the Argonauts on my own. Like.
I wanted to remake The Elephant Man at one point.
Really?
But anyway.
But like you wanted to try and... You watched it and wanted to figure out how it was done, or you wanted to remake it like yourself?
I wanted to write. I wanted to rewrite and remake the film The Elephant Man.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't want to make it.
That's a really interesting thing.
That's a really just. How old were you?
I was
22.
Yeah. I was 13 or 13.
Wow, for 13-year-olds want to do that. That's pretty cool. Like,
I never tried though, because I fell on the first hurdle. I was like, I don't have a camera. I don't have any prosthetics. I don't know how to. But you know,
the first script I ever wrote with with quote marks around it was I wrote a parody script of Star Wars on Microsoft Word. Nice. So it was literally like the play scripts where it's like the names and like because that was the only script I'd ever seen was the ones you used to get for like school plays and stuff like that. So I was just there Times New Roman like typing this like
that's lovely,
Star Wars parody.
I mean, we laugh about it now, but that's lovely, and I think that's such a lovely thing, and I think that's one of the strengths
makes
of the
us
film.
Cineboys.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of the strengths of the film, I think, and how it depicts that, in my view.
Well, I came out having that feeling of like I can and I remember making stuff with you guys at university, but with my friends when I was at school and stuff, and like and that kind of like forcing your friends to do stuff is like really embarrassing. Do it. It's cringy, but he doesn't look at it as an embarrassing thing. No. Ultimately, because he's Spielberg.
And even the films he makes as a kid look fucking awesome, which I think is true to what you're saying about it being a bit fanciful.
I'd love to actually see those films. I was hoping it was going to end with some of his old films at the credits or something.
Classic little technique. One thing I wanted to, because you just touched on that a little bit before we started like going through a "this is your lifestyle" thing, but is that you mentioned that because I thought this as soon as I came out of the cinema, and you mentioned it just now. This idea that back then, kids, that was a formative cultural moment, and not just for the era, but for the medium. And obviously, it's a time where there's less distractions for people.
Yeah.
Do you think film has the same power now in terms of a kid will sit down? I don't want this to turn into the screens everywhere, but like iPads, but.
I know what you mean.
But you know what I mean? Like, I just wonder, because there's so much stuff, like, it's so easy to be overstimulated.
I just don't necessarily think it's going to be... Do you think it's not going to be one thing? I think kids that are like us that look at things and think, oh, yeah, I want to make that. Like, that is a certain kind of mindset. Whether you're succeeding at it or otherwise. You have you're the kind of kid that would have taken something apart in order to put it back together kind of thing. That's what, like... We don't have the luxury of like there's just one film that everyone has to go and watch. Like even in the 70s, it was Star Wars playing at the box office. You couldn't see anything else, and people queued around the corner to watch it. Right?
Yeah, I think we had Small Soldiers.
Yeah, exactly.
First good to see that in Derby.
Yeah, I mean it in like this that it was like a monoculture. With music, it was the Beatles. There was one band, there was one fucking film, basically. Nowadays, it's like the kids probably think about like there's probably some kid playing Fortnite thinking like, how the hell did they make this? And they're going to start their journey to like learn how to make games. I think it exists, but I just think there's so much culture now. That it's not gonna be as
it's diluted a bit.
Maybe.
Yeah. I think multiplexes might be partially to blame. Obviously, part of the reason that it was Star Wars and just Star Wars, it was Jaws and just Jaws, was because the buildings were just one or two screens maximum, and that was it, and that was how they were structured, and they weren't out in the sticks, in a big warehouse. They were in cities and they were in towns, and they were part of a community. Yeah. And nowadays, you have more choice, you have more platforms. So you've got YouTube, and a lot of the people in the younger generation are gravitating more towards like influencers and that kind of content, and less towards films, really. So I do think that I don't know if it's a problem, because I think it might just be generational, and maybe you never know when. People who are 10 now grow up to be 20, they might have more reverence for the cinema than they did when they were younger. But
there's more to distract you, isn't there? I think that's I mean, like, not just with like the different mediums, but the different way you can access mediums. Like, you don't necessarily have to go to the cinema anymore. You can just watch it on Netflix. You can literally wait a week in some cases, and it'll be on Apple TV. So like, that's just something I was thinking. I try and refrain from being too negative, because I'm not entirely sure how it's going to go. But to me, I guess someone that's nostalgia's definitely influencing this, but this concern I have, I think, for, I don't know, the impact of the cinema experience and what offerings are there to sort of generate that. You know what I mean? I don't know. I'm probably being too cynical.
This is relevant to something me and Ben were talking about before we recorded, but I said I don't really go to the cinema much anymore, and this is post-COVID. Like, it just... my attention span is broken. You know, like I wish there was a better excuse. I get up halfway through. I need to use the toilet, and I hate not being able to like to having to leave a film.
Yeah,
so almost to the point that I'll just wait till it comes out online. You know, or like stream it. And this is coming from someone that used to go to, like, when we did the first started this podcast, you know, we'd go to the cinema every week. And I worked in that building.
And me as well, by the end.
Look at us now. This podcast outlived our time there, though, which is good. So,
that's true,
I don't go to, but like I made an effort to watch this film in the cinema because it felt like it kind of justified it. And I realised that one of the last films I watched before this was West Side Story, which was Spielberg's previous film.
Okay. Not seen that, actually.
I thought it was brilliant. You know, it's unfortunately marred by the fact that the lead actor's kind of got some
he's in
troubling allegations to his name, which kind of I didn't know that when I watched it. I was just like, cool, because you know, didn't engage with that element of it. But I actually argue that it does a better job of adapting it than the original film.
Right. Okay.
You know, adapting the source material. It's more honest. It's more self-reflective, and it feels like a good counterpoint to this movie in the sense that it's a kind of, he made it for his parents, like clearly, you know, like that's what I get from it. But anyway,
it's so effortless as well. I mean, like at this point in his career, like the
first
way
musical,
the
first time he's made a musical film, it's kind of mad because he's such a choreographed filmmaker, right? Like his the famous one-er shots of just like tracking along the beach and Jaws and stuff like that. Like,
often overlooked as well, like his one-ers. There's a great one in Indiana Jones that nobody remembers because Birdman came out and everyone thought that was the first time it happened.
So that became like a marketing thing now, isn't it? No, it's really interesting. I just think it's a really interesting point because the landscape is changing a lot and there are a lot more things that can distract us. And I'd speak honestly about myself. Like, I love films. I'd always say film is my number one medium of choice, but
you could argue
video games, man, take up so much of my time if I let them. And
you could argue we're all DVD/VHS era film
home cinema
students, right?
Huge for me.
That's predominantly where I watch films. I had a video shop around the corner we used to just go and buy.
That does the sort of spectacle. It made it an event, didn't it? And I think we're losing that. And I don't want to.
I think it's different now. I think you get kids just watch thousands and thousands. Like, you get these letterbox kids that just have like ridiculous numbers of films.
Yeah, that makes me feel so depressed.
Because all they do is watch. They got like 3 screens at a go.
There's no. How could you take it? But, you know, fair play to you.
But they'll be the next one. You know, they'll be making the next.
Yeah,
they'll be the next Spielberg is somewhere in there, like, you know.
Yeah. Maybe best not to be too cynical about it.
Well, they're just A24 have just hired a 17-year-old YouTuber to make a movie. So,
really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're really flexing their muscles, aren't they? Now A24, they're just banging them out, aren't they?
Yeah.
That is a gamble. That is.
It
might pay off though. You never know.
Yeah. It's those back rooms videos. It's a tangent. Sorry, I'm
no. Yeah.
Oh, those.
They're like those weird things where it's like
limnic spaces.
Yeah, like liminal spaces and like
liminal. Sorry. Yeah.
Limerick. Did you say?
I said limnic. Sounds like a surname.
Like they're kind of Irish riddles.
Liminal. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
It's some kid that makes those. They're giving him a film.
I've seen some of those. They are quite smart, to be fair.
Yeah, they're like just Blender and stuff, right? A lot of them.
Yeah.
It's weird shit. But
lots of cross media stuff going on, isn't there?
That's A24's whole thing,
yeah.
No, but I mean, more back to Fabelmans. Well, we're barely even talking about it. But I think it's the film that kind of spurs that kind of discussion because, like, it is about art and it is about like what you sacrifice to create, and also what it means to make things and stuff like that, and it does. As people that are creatives, you should reflect on that, right? Because it feels like it's made for that. It's not a commercial success, this movie. And
it's not. Such a shame. A lot of his recent films haven't made
it's really
any money.
Quiet, isn't it?
I don't think he's making them to bring in the big.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, no, he's done that.
He's had the hits.
He doesn't prove anything to anyone, does he? Really?
No.
But no, I think that's interesting. So overall, a good discussion.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's interesting that maybe, Ben, you're a bit more critical of it.
Yeah, I do think it's partially down to the circumstances in which I went to see it. I might have just not been in the right
Were you naked?
frame of mind. I was, I mean, I got kicked out for the first 10 minutes, so I had to read the synopsis and I was like, this sounds like a self-congratulatory piece of shit.
Just typing it as you're being dragged away.
You're doing a voice note.
Yeah. No,
Pulling.
I think you guys have actually warmed me to it a little bit more, and I
And I think
will
you've
see it
maybe
again.
made me be a bit more critical of it as well. So
Yeah. It just there were certain aspects of it I really did like. Like I say, the whole handling of the family and the kind of deconstruction of the family. And I also liked, just really briefly, kind of want to say, I also really liked how there was no catching the cheating lover moment.
Oh, yeah.
Because I really thought that was on the cards.
Yeah.
And the way he presented that was so much more graceful.
Yeah.
So, by the time that they sit down together, one of the best scenes in my opinion is when they sit down together and watch the film reel of him on the camping trip.
Yeah.
And
Because I
she
thought that's what
slowly
was going to come
realised-
up.
Yeah,
I thought,
same.
yeah.
But it was so slow and so retrospective in the way that he
takes it out of the film and he gives them the fantasy instead, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's it.
Fabelmans. Get it?
Yeah. Great film. And Michelle Williams, I thought, was superb. I mean,
She was great in it.
You can never not write. You can't write her off ever, can you?
No.
Not you ever should. But
She was wonderful.
One of my favourite actresses working at the moment, and again, just showing that range, that ability to play that sort of kind, caring,
Also
thoroughly
kind of-
decent human being, but who's got demons.
She's a
Who's
bit mad, maybe.
Yeah.
There was the scene when she got the call from her mum that had just died. I genuinely I thought, was like Spielberg's mum like insane or something, and they're going to go in this like she's schizophrenic kind of thing, and she's hearing voices. But that was a really like interesting, dreamlike kind of scene. Yeah.
So good.
Good stuff.
Yeah, good overall.
Questing the cinematic void.
Well, there we have it then. Another fruitful endeavour, I think. Thank you so much for coming back, Alfie.
It's a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
That's the first time we've done it in a while. But
thanks for keeping it. Thanks for keeping the Cineboys dream alive.
yeah, well, it's always burning for you, baby. We'll get you back very soon. Next week, we are going to be watching and then discussing Ant-Man Quantumania.
Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania.
So we haven't done a Marvel film yet. We did a couple, didn't we, back in the original run? And I feel like my opinion of them has changed quite a lot.
We did Infinity War.
You did Endgame. That was the last one you two did.
I did.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we did that. Yeah.
My opinion, I was always always aware of the problems of Marvel's dominance, even back then. But now I find them quite grating now. So I think my opinion has changed, and I was a bit reluctant to discuss a film like this, but it feels apt given the way the film's been received, and the position of the film in terms of spawning the next generation, which I think is having problems with by the looks of things.
Yeah, it does look like it. Looks like it's going in a downwards trajectory somewhat.
Oh,
maybe.
There we go.
We might both love it.
Both were like, "This is great." I'm back in. I have heard that Jonathan Majors is supposed to be he's like the best thing about it.
Okay.
Kang,
But he's a good actor. Yeah, he's Kang. Yeah.
I mean, they did sort of tend to. I mean, the villain thing is a bit of an issue for them, but when they get it right, it tends to be the best thing. Like if you think about like Michael B. Jordan in Black Panther and Thanos, he's one of the better things.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for listening as always.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you to Alfie again, and we will see you again soon.
See you soon.
Love you. Bye.
Bye.